Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, True Crime and Felines. For my returning subscribers, welcome back my feline friends. For those of you that are new here, my name is Brandy and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my 14 felines. So guys, I just want to say, oh my gosh, there is an older video of mine that for some reason spiked, and it's being recommended, I guess, by YouTube due to their algorithm and stuff like that, and it has driven a lot of traffic to my channel, and my subscriber count has increased over 100 subscribers in 30 days. That is, I don't even know what to say. I mean, you know, I'm here because I like doing these videos and I'm glad you enjoy them, but to, you know, get more subscribers, that's just amazing to me. So thank you out there if you are a feline friend and you like my content, because I like doing these videos, so I plan to continue. Now let's get into this week's case. Now this week's case appears just to be a son murdering his parents, no big deal. But as you go down the rabbit hole in research, you find out that it potentially has something to do with the assassination of a president. So, let's get started. Fred and Edwina Rogers lived in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston, Texas. Fred was a retired real estate salesman and Edwina was a retired sales representative. They had one son named Charles, who was born December 30th, 1921. Now, Charles was considered very highly intelligent. He did very well in school. He spoke 7 different languages and he had a ham radio hobby. After high school, Charles enrolled in Texas A&M University, but soon dropped out. It just wasn't working out for him. However, he then enrolled in the University of Houston, where he went on to get his bachelor's degree in nuclear physics. During World War II, Charles was a pilot with the U.S. Navy, and he also served in the Department of Navy Intelligence. After the war, Charles discovered he had a knack for finding gas and oil underground, so he started working as a seismologist for Shell Oil, and he would work there for the next 9 years. However, in 1957, Charles had suddenly quit his job and gave no explanation on why. Now, shortly after that, he had moved into the house with his parents. And by 1965, 43-year-old Charles appeared to be unemployed. Now, neighbors were unaware that Charles actually lived at the house because he would leave before sunrise and he wouldn't come back until well after dark. So that's why I'm not sure if he was employed or not. But he was doing something during the day. Now, Charles was reclusive and he had some strange behaviors. When Charles was home, he mainly stayed in his bedroom, which was in the attic of the house. And he would try to avoid his parents at all costs. Other family members and the family maid reported that Charles would only communicate with his parents by shoving notes underneath closed doors. The family maid actually stated that she didn't think Edwina saw her son Charles in the last 5 years that she was alive face to face. Now, in June of 1965, Edwina's nephew, Marvin, would actually call the police and ask them to do a wellness check. Apparently, Marvin had been calling the house for the last several days and could not get anyone on the phone. And he was concerned that since his aunt and uncle were elderly, that something may have happened. So the police arrived at the house, and after being unable to get anyone to answer the door, they would make their way around the back of the house and force their way in. Now, upon first inspection, they didn't notice anything was amiss. I mean, everything looked fairly normal. The only odd thing was that there was a bunch of food on the dining room table that probably should have been in the refrigerator, and some of it had started to spoil. They went ahead and searched through the house, but they found no one, not even Charles. It appeared like the family had just up and left. It wasn't until one of the officers, for some reason, opened the refrigerator, and what he saw was a gruesome sight. There were 2 severed heads staring back at him from the vegetable crisper. They were the heads of Fred and Edwina Rogers. Fred was 81 and Edwina was 79 years old. Upon further investigation, the fridge seemed packed full with cuts of meat that the police assumed was from a butchered hog. And their first thought was, it's kind of a waste that all this meat is going to spoil. However, they ended up finding out that these cuts of meat that was cut up, washed, and stacked neatly in the fridge were actually from the limbs and torso of Fred and Edwina. And that explains why the food was out on the dining room table to make room for these slabs of meat. So the investigation began. Authorities would do autopsies on what was left of Fred and Edwina, and they determined that Fred had taken the brunt of the violence. He was hit in the head with what they believed was a claw hammer. Then his eyes were gouged out and his genitalia was cut off. For Edwina, she had a gunshot to the back of her head, execution style. They were able to determine that the murders actually took place on Father's Day, June 20th, 3 days prior to the discovery. And to the authorities' surprise, the house was in pretty good shape. There was very little blood that they found, and somebody had actually gone through and thoroughly cleaned up after themselves. Now, the blood that they did find, they determined that Fred and Edwina were dismembered in the upstairs bathroom, and their organs were removed, cut up, and flushed down the toilet. They were able to find some of these remains and organs in a sewer system nearby. However, they were unable to find all the missing body parts and organs, so they weren't able to put the bodies completely back together. They also found a blood trail leading from the upstairs bathroom up into the attic bedroom, which was Charles's. There was blood smeared on the keyhole to his door, which he kept locked at all times. And once they broke into his bedroom, they found a handsaw, which they believed was used to dismember Fred and Edwina's bodies. But there was no trace of Charles, and they had seen that he had taken some of his clothes and other personal belongings and seemed to just have disappeared. So they put out a warrant to find him, as he became their #1 suspect. Now, questions started being asked on why would Charles do this. Of course, he had some quirks, but murder? Well, according to forensic accountant Hugh Gardner and his wife Martha, who had studied this case ever since 1997, they stated, due to some of their research, that he found that Fred and Edwina were actually both very physically and emotionally abusive to Charles ever since he was a child. It was also stated that Fred and Edwina were devious con artists. So according to their research in a book they wrote in 2003 called The Icebox Murders, they go on to say that Fred was actually a bookie while he was retired, and he engaged in some illegal activities such as gambling and fraud. It was believed that both Fred and Edwina continued to physically and emotionally abuse Charles well into his adulthood, and they started taking advantage of him financially. Now, the house that the three lived in was actually owned by Charles, not Fred and Edwina. Now, it's unknown how this came about or why this came about, but according to my research, it sounds like Fred and Edwina were just really bad with money. They started taking loans out on the house in Charles's name. They'd pocket the money and leave the bill for Charles. They also started stealing from Charles's life savings and pretty much making his life a living hell. So this sort of explains why Charles avoided his parents at all costs and only communicated them through notes, right? So after years of the abuse and now the financial fraud, Charles just snapped and ended up taking out his parents. So that's one theory. The next theory actually starts in 1950. Charles, being a pilot, had actually joined the federally supported non-profit organization called the Civil Air Patrol. Now, this is an organization for aviation-minded individuals from all backgrounds. Now, reportedly, this is where Charles met a man named David Ferry. And David Ferry is actually a well-known conspirator in the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. So John Craig and Philip Rogers wrote a book in 1992 called The Man on the Grassy Knoll. And in it, they stated that Charles was actually a CIA agent, hence all the reclusiveness and secrecy around him, and that he was actually one of the two shooters in the assassination of Kennedy. The book goes on to state that Charles actually probably impersonated Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City, and that he was one of the three tramps that were arrested in the train yard adjacent from Dealey Plaza after the assassination. Those of you that are unfamiliar with kind of the details over the Kennedy assassination, there were three men that were arrested, and they were called the Three Tramps because they were arrested in the train yard, and they are photographed many times in police custody, and the rumor was they had something to do with the assassination. However, they were let go days later, and all records of them seem to have disappeared from the police department. Now, these three men, it's highly debated who their identities are to this day. Even though there's pictures of them, some of them are grainy, they're black and white, so yeah, it's highly debated on who they are. So the book goes on to say that the reason Charles ended up murdering his parents was because after the assassination, his mother began monitoring his phone calls, and she became suspicious, and both his parents ended up breaking into his bedroom while he was gone, and apparently Charles had a notebook or a diary, and they read it, which included details about the assassination. He found out about this, and he ended up taking them out to keep his secret. Now, neither of these theories have been 100% confirmed, so they still stand as theories. Now, after murdering his parents, it's believed that Charles actually fled to Mexico. Now, even though there was a search warrant out for him, Charles was never found again. And it was believed that he was able to use his friends that he met through his ham radio hobby, or use his high-powered friends he met through working at the Shell Oil, or because he was a CIA agent, he just had powerful friends that were able to hide him. Now, in that 2003 book, The Icebox Murders by Hugh and Martha Gardner, they stated that Charles ended up in Honduras eventually, and that many eyewitnesses had seen him there after 1965. Now, they go on to say that Charles met an ironic end. During a wage dispute, miners attacked him and he ended up with a pickaxe to the head, similar to how his father died. So in July of 1975, 10 years after the murders took place, a judge declared Charles Rogers dead in absentia. They mainly did this so his estate could be probated. Now, Charles's house where the murders took place stood empty. Nobody wanted to live there until about 1972 when the city finally tore it down. It was an empty lot until the year 2000 when developers bought it and built condominiums in its place. So even though this case is still officially considered unsolved, many people give credit to Hugh and Martha Gardner for pretty much solving this case and having the most plausible solution of what happened. Charles Rogers had always been the one and only suspect in this case. So this is just my opinion, but if Charles's dad, Fred, was a bookie and participating in illegal activities, should Charles really be the only suspect? I mean, maybe the evidence pointed to that, and I totally get that. But I hope they looked into that maybe Fred crossed the wrong person and met his demise. And maybe Charles fled just to avoid the whole situation because he feared for his life. That's just some reasonable doubt that popped in my head while I was reviewing this case. But what are your thoughts? Do you think Charles should be the only suspect, or do you think something else is going on? Do you believe he was really a CIA agent, or was the most plausible solution that he just snapped because his parents were taking advantage of him? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you would like to become a feline friend, please hit that subscribe button, and I will be back next Friday with one or more of my 14 felines to bring you another true crime case or mystery. Thanks, guys. I will see you later.